Thanks everybody for coming. What I'm going to do is I'm actually going to take us through like a little bit of a journey with vintage posters. I've actually got a few posters that I've started to restore. I've got an original poster from 1906 over there as well. I'm going to show you that. I want you to get your head around like what a vintage poster is, the types of paper that they're actually printed on, and then we're going to lead into the Russian propaganda posters, and I'll explain what they are, and so we'll go through that as well. So I'm going to go over this way to start with. So vintage posters, what they do, they'll go through a process, and the process is called linen backing. So usually when you see a vintage poster and you think, oh my God, that's in amazing condition, that's not real, what actually happens is when they first come to me, that was stuck to a board. That has been put into a big bath of water, that's been bleached, that's been removed from there. And then the second thing that happens is a process called linen backing, which is canvas, which is actually stretched onto the back of the stretcher. You get a barrier paper then that is actually like backed onto the canvas, and that's actually used with a wheat paste, so it's all archival, it's all reversible, so if anything ever happens, this can be put back into a tank of water and removed again. So it's all archival, acid-free, and it's all reversible. So then what happens is, so this poster here, this was actually there was two posters, and I've actually got the remnants of both posters, and I'm going to make one out of it. So I do have to sacrifice something to make one, but what it is like I'll end up piecing this back together on this, and anything that's missing, I will then go in and repaint it, redraw it, and do what I've got to do with it. There's a fine line between restoration and conservation as well, so it's kind of like, it's one of those things, like I was actually taught by the Americans how to do restoration, and it's always sort of less is best, so you kind of want to be able to see the restoration. If you go with, say, for example, the French restorers, they airbrush everything to an inch of its life, so you cannot tell if it's actually real or not. Italians have a tendency to go even beyond that. So, but it's one of those things where it's like you want to be able to see what it is so you know that it's real and you actually know what you're getting as such, because I mean these things now have become commodities where the auction houses, museums, galleries, everybody, they're a commodity that everybody wants, and they're actually worth a lot of money, depending on what it is. Even in the collection that we've got today, so what that is, it's a publication done. So they're not actually the first issue of the posters. They are original posters, but they were printed in 1967 for the 50th anniversary of the Bolshevik Revolution. So what they've done, they've actually gone back through time, through World War I, World War II, through the Civil War, and they've actually reproduced the posters, put them into a portfolio, and then they've been sent back out into the community to use as propaganda to keep the machine going. Okay. What I've also got here as well, actually I'll show you this very quickly. So this right here, that's going to be upside down, but that's okay. So this is an original poster from 1906. So this is an artist called Cappiello. So this poster here, this is actually by Cappiello. So these were being produced the same time that these original posters over here were being produced. That one's French, obviously Russian. These posters, if you go from like, say for example, Art Nouveau into Art Deco, this is an example of an Art Deco poster. So when the early Russian posters were being produced as well, speed, industrialization. So all of a sudden, you've got graphics that have gone from being like really beautiful, complicated graphics, which is Art Nouveau. You then go into Art Deco. Okay, so this is an Art Deco poster. You look at something like this, and this is the beginning of like graphic design. This is the beginning of speed and advertising. So the rule with this one is you're supposed to look at this poster and you're supposed to take the information in within 7 seconds. And you're going to see with a lot of the Russian posters as well, it's all about industrialization for the people, building. This is sort of on the other side where it's actually the French looking at a poster, driving in their new car. Okay? I know we could restore on that, don't worry. Okay. So what happens, and you can see how brittle they are. Yep. So this is another one which I'm sure everybody knows. Same artist, Cappiello. This has been linen backed. Sure you recognize that image. But that's the difference of what the linen backing does as well. So it's understanding as well, like, because a lot of people sort of say like, oh, it's a reproduction, it's not the original. A lot of the posters that are the originals, you can actually get them to a state where they actually look like they've actually been printed yesterday type of thing. Some of the posters were stored for the last 100 years. For example, that Cappiello poster we just pulled out, if you actually get that really close up, you can actually still smell the ink as well. And the other thing is too, with the colors of this stuff, if you can imagine these days, like when you print a poster or you print something, like you go through like a 4-color process. They're not 4-color processes, so every color that was actually printed in those posters was actually done with a separate plate, and it was actually done by the artist, which we've done. So that's Capiello, and that is the artist who actually produced those. And you can see in context, he's actually drawing directly onto the actual stone themselves, and then that's actually printed. So every color, he had to separate that every color by eye. He had to draw everything in reverse for it to bring positive. So it's pretty amazing. So what we're going to do, we're going to move on to the next one. I'm actually going to tell everybody a little bit of a story. I want to put vintage posters into context, especially with propaganda posters, because a lot of the times now we look at a propaganda poster and they're in a mylar sleeve, they're in a museum, they're somewhere where they're not in context of where the original person who saw them. So this poster here, and these are a couple out of my own personal collection. If you see this one, it looks like an iPod poster. Yes, please. So if you look at that one there, it's like they were actually put up in New York, and that was shortly after September 11. So the artist went around and he actually popped those on top of the iPod posters. Nobody realised, and then eventually Art in America got hold of it. They published it, and they've sort of become semi-iconic now. But what it was, it's for the Iraq War, and across the bottom it actually says, rather than saying 10,000 songs in your pocket, it actually says 10,000 Iraqis killed, 773 US soldiers dead. Okay, so that was current at the time when they went up. The reason why that poster is actually really important to me was because I was actually there, September 11. I got on the train that morning and I actually was under as it was happening. I had an iPod in my hand. It was actually that generation of iPod with a little scrolly wheel. So every time I look at that poster, it reminds me of New York. It reminds me of time, of being there when things were happening. And again, that's the whole thing with putting a poster into context, and this is the whole thing with a propaganda poster and what they actually do. This was New York as well. So again, I look at that poster, which is a beautiful graphic. That was actually going to work every day. So what had happened was I'd actually hop on the train, and they were basically bits of paper with some ink on them. But what they were, which is what a poster is, they were actually printouts of all the people who were missing from the buildings, who were never found. So I mean, it hits home with me. So it's a whole thing with the propaganda posters, and I sort of want to put this in context before we start to look at the others, because they are from the 1905 there to probably the 1960s, 70s, but there's a lot of stuff through a lot of important times in Russia that actually means something. So, and you'll find out too when we get to the Russian part of it, my Russian history, it's not very good. And my Russian is even worse. So Gonara, who's my manager here, she actually helped me do the translations. So what I did, I actually went through the entire portfolio, snapped photos, and then I've gone in and I've actually gone through Google Translate. So I've actually got a comparison of each one of it, so you'll actually see that as well. So propaganda is an attempt to influence people's opinions or behaviour through the use of specific images and words. It usually gives limited information which is heavily biased in its presentation. Propaganda typically achieves its aims by generating an emotional reaction in the viewer. For much of the 20th century, public posters in every country were a common way for governments to use propaganda to persuade their citizens. They often relied upon simple images in order to manipulate people through fear or guilt. Understanding the historical meaning of a propaganda poster can be difficult because we did not live through the events that inspired them. However, many propaganda posters rely upon a limited number of elements to persuade the audience. So number one is stereotypes. It was common for posters to represent a particular group of people, usually in a very racist way, using stereotypes. A stereotype is an oversimplification of what a particular racial group looks like. Propaganda uses stereotypes so that audiences can readily identify which group of people is the target of the poster. Getting to know common stereotypes can be quite confronting, as they can be very racist in nature. However, once you become familiar with the common forms of stereotyping, you can identify the appropriate group of people being treated in a particular poster. Like the amount of bits of paper that I've handled over the years, especially with what was coming through the studio in New York, because it was every major, so you had like Christie's, Sotheby's, Swan auction houses, private collectors, and it was everybody who was bringing the stuff in. There were some pretty confronting things that I was sort of faced with, do I restore this? Don't I restore this? I then had to sort of it wasn't about the actual item, it was more about the person who had it, is how I made the decision. So if it was going into the right place, it was fine. Some of the people who did walk through the door, you've kind of no way. So, symbolism. So just like political cartoons, propaganda posters use simple objectives and symbols that the general public would be familiar with. These symbols are used to represent important concepts or ideas. For example, using a skull and crossbones could represent death or danger. Some other symbols used in propaganda: anchor, safety, security, chains, imprisonment, slavery, a dollar sign, money, eagle, America, hammer and sickle, communism, an octopus was greed, puppet being controlled, red star, communism, sheep, blind trust, spiderweb, control, entrapment, stars and stripes, America, a turtle, slow, vulnerable, woman with a flag, specific country, a bear, Russia, crowd of people, unstoppable force, door, gate, access, entry, a gravestone, death, a hare, carelessness, arrogance, kangaroo, Australia, ostrich, refusal to hear bad news, a rainbow, hope, future, a rose, love, skull, death, spiked helmet, German, swastika, Nazism, Uncle Sam, America, woman with scales, justice, a bulldog, Great Britain, Cupid, love, dove, peace, the Grim Reaper, death, hourglass, limited time, lamb, innocence, owl, wisdom, rat, infectious disease, samurai, Japan, snake, evil temptation, throne, power, wall, division, separation, young children, naivety, innocence, victim. So with the text, posters will often include short sections of information, either statistics or statements. The information is meant to provide the audience with just enough data for them to draw the conclusion the creator wanted them to make. When looking at a propaganda poster, it is worth asking whether the information provided is completely accurate or what information has been left out. Number 4, the connection with the audience. Posters will try to connect directly with the audience through a number of techniques. They will either use the second person pronoun, you in the text, ask a rhetorical question and the audience is meant to think about it, or it will have people in the poster looking directly at the viewer. Propaganda does this in order to make the audience feel like they need to respond in some way. So the appeal to emotion. Propaganda will try to play on a person's emotions in order to prompt them to respond. The most frequent emotional responses posters try to generate are guilt, patriotism, fear, or shame. And then the call to action. Almost every propaganda poster has a statement about what their audience should do after seeing the poster. For example, enlist today or buy war bonds. The call to action is often the best way to determine the poster's purpose and intended audience. There was actually one poster that I restored. It was actually the Joseph Liebovitz Gallery, and it was an Australian World War I poster. And there is a whole bunch over here. I may actually hand a couple out so people can sort of have a quick look at them while we're actually talking. But it was an enlist now. It was a 6-sheet poster. It would have been the height of the ceiling, but it was actually a light horseman with a sword above his head. It was an original one from World War I. The thing is as well, like what I found with some of the colours that were actually in these posters was actually really bright and uplifting. You're going to find with a lot of the Russian posters too, like they're going to be very sort of monochromatic, but they're also going to be red and black, and there's a reason for that as well. So each different country had their own thing when it came to the graphics as well, and each different government was actually pushing for that, and they actually had their own thing set up, so the artists were actually instructed to do it a certain way. Yeah, so the posters that you're actually about to handle, they are the originals from World War I, World War II. All right, so Russian political posters. Soviet posters first appeared during the Proletarian Revolution in Russia. They delivered Communist Party slogans to the masses and called on the workers and peasants to fight for freedom and justice. Most of us are familiar with Dmitry Moore's famous poster, "Have you signed up as a volunteer?" And that's the one that I used as the main poster that was on the invite. The image of a Red Army soldier with plumes of black smoke rising from the factory smokestacks in the background, bluntly questioning the Russian worker about his contribution to the defense of the October Revolution. It became the iconic piece of Soviet propaganda. Posters took on a very important role during the October Revolution and subsequent civil war. Very few newspapers were published in those days, and often a poster replaced the tabloid. Poster art was widely accessible to the masses. The images it depicted were easily understood by everyone, and a short and energetic accompanying slogan stuck in the viewer's mind as a constant call for action. In time of civil war, propaganda posters were sent to the front lines in the same capacity as bullets and artillery shells. They were posted on walls in cities, which were usually under assault by the White Guard armies and foreign interventionists. During the Civil War, Ruster windows, I apologise for my Russian right now, Okna Rosta, a famous project by the Russian Telegraph Agency, brought together artists who turned telegrams from the Red Army soldiers into posters within hours of receiving them from the front lines. If you go back to the way that things were actually like printed, so if you imagine trying to turn around a poster that quickly, it's not just like today where you just go print, print, print. It was a whole thing where they had to take it to the, the printers, they had to make the plates, but they were turning them around that quickly and they're actually getting them back to the front lines as well, which is pretty amazing. Okay, so when the great edifice of socialism was being erected through the first series of 5-year plans, propaganda posters could be found everywhere in the USSR. They were posted on construction sites, collective farm fields, grain elevator towers, and massive concrete walls. A look back at the posters from that era creates a chronicle timeline of the Soviet Union's creation and evolution. Each and every major event in the life of the Soviet people is reflected in the legacy of the Socialist Communist Party. So the very first poster here, so go into this portfolio, 1917 to 1916, you can see what Google Translate's done for me. Soviet political poster, so it's pretty straightforward. With a poster like that, they're in a portfolio, and you can see in the bottom left-hand corner, see how it's got a little bit of mold on it as well? That's the sort of thing where I could actually put that into a tank of water, I could bleach it, and I could bring that back as well. The problem with something like that is it'll buckle. I've then got to make a decision on, as far as like if it's going to go into a museum or a gallery or wherever it's going to go, what do I do with it? Because every other poster that's there, you wouldn't want to linen back it, you'd actually just want to flatten it. If it's torn or ripped, you can actually use archival tape so it doesn't tear anymore, or you can put a paper backing on them as well. So these are the decisions you've got to make when they've actually gone from when they're on the streets and what they were. The whole thing with the vintage poster, they say the lifespan of a vintage poster was 2 weeks. So it was supposed to have been put up, destroyed, and that's the end of it. So it's amazing that these things have actually made it all the way through. Some people have saved them. Sometimes there's just rolls of posters that have like come from under floorboards. I mean, there's a lot of, so linoleum and in walls, they used to use vintage posters as insulation. So someone will buy an old house, they'll rip a house down, and all of a sudden they find these amazing posters, and the posters are actually worth 10 times more than the actual house. And that's the funny thing with socialist posters have now become a capitalist commodity as well. So the auction houses and the money that they go for is incredible, and they're sought after. So again, exhibition, Soviet political poster. And a lot of times in these portfolios too, it's instructing the people where to put the posters, what to do with them. Okay, and again, Soviet political poster, and that is just a list of the posters that are in there. So 50 years of Soviet power. Again, 50 years of Soviet power, pretty self-explanatory. Okay, so the October Revolution, the army is with Lenin moving Russia forward. So that would have been used as just a general propaganda piece that was put up. Communist Party, Soviet Union, long live under the banner of Lenin. Tells everybody, lead us. Resolution of the Congress, 5-year plan, national economic development. 1924, Leningrad, naming. So from Petrograd, result of the great events of 1917. Signing of the Act of the Unconditional Surrender of the Germans, May 1945. Okay, the 1965 Directive, improve industry management, strengthening economic incentives of industrial production. Okay, so this one, you've actually got 2 parts to it. The top, the ship, is actually the Aurora. So that was the ship that actually fired the first shot that started the Bolshevik Revolution. And you can see that represented in it. So it says, listen to, well, that's the Google translation anyway. But in the bottom, you can see the Red Army, all power to the Soviets. So everybody who's down the bottom are the people that the Soviets were fighting against. 1917 to 1967, again, the Aurora, representation of the Bolshevik Revolution, the start of it. Okay, forward to the defense of the Urals, that was a region, and that was actually everybody rallying to go and defend the region. And you can see that these are historical moments, and hence the reason why it's a portfolio and it's meant to, get the people going. They stand for the defense of Petrograd, St. Petersburg, shoulder to shoulder. And you can see all the people that are actually in the poster as well, so it represents everyone. But the simple graphics as well, you can see that it's actually like people look at it and they take the information in, they're gone, they understand what it's about. But the other thing too, you can see the fact that there's like a lot of stuff we're looking at now, all of these posters, red, black, white. The red is very much representational of the Red Army as well. Okay, so this one, if you look at the soldier, to the defense of Leningrad, it's a World War II poster. You can see the change in the helmet on the soldier as well. So they keep referencing, going back. Everything goes back to the Bolshevik Revolution. Okay, so this one. This is actually, you've got a capitalist, a priest, and a rich farmer. So this is against the workers. So the rich farmers wanted to hang on to the land. They didn't want to come around and be socialists. And this was the fight against everybody sharing. And again, the noose that's at the top, that's for the people who are trying to fight against it, and they're trying to stop them from actually doing that. Again, rich farmer. So kulak. Destroy rich farmers. Taken from the religion, supports the farmers, enemy of the state. Okay, so the Denken Gang, again, representing authority, the people who were trying to stop communism happening, the people who the Red Army were fighting against. Okay, so this one is the USSR and Germany. So it was the agreement not to invade. It was broken by the Germans. So then you've got a Red Army soldier who is basically saying, we will ruthlessly defeat and destroy the enemy. That's the picture of Hitler. This one's about war. I guess it's not about education then. So let's change that. Good. That would be, by the look of the physical poster, I'd say that's probably 30s, 20s, 30s. 1941, is it? The funny thing is with these posters as well, usually when I pick up a poster, I can feel and I know when it's from. Because these posters are all printed on the same paper stock, I can't actually, I have an idea of the art, the style that's actually been done, but as far as the physical touch of the poster, it actually makes it difficult for me to go, is it World War I? Is it World War II? And there is the distinction between the printing at the turn of the century to the middle of the century changes dramatically. So the colour and the inks become, a lot more substantial as well. All right. Red Float, Navy and Army, Long Live, Vanguard, Revolutions. You must help the hungry children of the Volga region. Comrade, get ready as the Bolsheviks. Get ready as a Bolshevik for an impact now. So basically that's for the farmers, plant food as fast as possible. Again, production. Let's prepare for the labour feats of the front of the socialist construction. It's a famous Russian person in the background there who is a famous builder, let's say, is it? Sakhanov, that's who it is. The funny thing was when we were actually going through it, because all I had was my Google translation, and there's a couple of them that are way, way out. There's one good one coming up as well, which is actually quite funny. That's the reason why I decided to actually use the translations, because some of them didn't match up at all. Okay. Not a minute to stop production, no damaged products, perfect production. So basically saying no mistakes. Okay, Bo, thumbs up, so quality work. 5-year plan in 3 years. So basically this is encouraging the 5-year plans to get the work done quicker. Demobilise to the construction site. So basically return soldiers back to work, rebuild what was destroyed by the German army. So you can see a soldier coming back and rebuilding walls, factories. This one is actually about, so basically the capitalists. So you've got Russia, and it's defend Russia now. So basically the capitalists trying to get in. The Red Army, which is small, versus the capitalists, which is large. So you've got a capitalist down there on the bottom left, you see with the tanks on his head as well. And that's basically, again, defending Russia. Strengthen your defense. Long live the Soviet Revolution. So this one is actually a story about the Russian Air Force. They actually went out and there was a ship that got stuck in the ice. And all of the Russian people welcomed the Russian planes back. Ship got stuck in the ice. 111 people were actually rescued. The Air Force had to go out on numerous missions to bring them back. So this is actually a famous story. This one. So the translation, it's a good one. Constipation day treatment. So I don't know where that came from, but in actual fact what it is actually, it's 1 to 10 of the instructions of what a Russian worker should do. So it's not even close. It's quite funny. Okay. Heart of gold, hands of gold. So basically for the return workers, many years we will still appreciate you. Russian Federation of Farmers, 1922 formed, developing 25 million hectares of new land for farming, so for the food shortages. This one's about education. So this is actually with the Russian farmers who basically, no problem, stepping off the edge of a cliff. Knowledge is power. Work in industry, remove women from the canteens. So basically bringing back women back into the workforce. Let's give experience to young workers from older workers. For the good of the Soviet people, we'll build new power plants, redevelopment, fast production 5-year plan. So you can see that the train is there, so it's encouraging, moving forward. It's going from a train and speed, and then it goes into, you know, the space race, Gagarin. It also, I mean, it's one of those things where the train represents time. To the stars, there we go. Basically, you know, Russian, first into space. Again, 5-year plan, 4 years work for a high yield. Let's hoist the banner, flag over victory, so basically over Berlin. You can see just above the Brandenburg Gates there, you've actually got an American flag, Russian, British. This one, quite famous, for the motherland. And you can see this as well, so you can date this through Soviet soldier, type of helmet, so this is actually World War II. And again, the 5-year plans I speak of, which is 2 + 2 = 5. So it's all about getting the 5-year plans done early. So 2 + 2, the plan's actually done in 4 years. Without heavy industry, we cannot build any industry, which is actually a very important Russian artist. I'll talk about this one quickly. So what it was, I was actually working in the restoration studio of War. This poster, one of these posters came in front of me. So Russian constructivism. So basically the photo montage technique, I had the poster, the real one in front of me, working on it. And someone said to me, have a closer look at that. And I was just like, what are you talking about, sort of thing? And when I actually had a closer look, the photographs that are actually in the photo montage process, which they invented, were actually drawings. They didn't have the money to afford photography. So all of this technique was actually, you know, their drawings, which it was incredible.
Well, that's like common.
Yeah, that's what, they didn't have the money. These early ones, so Kluxus, yeah. I didn't know, I mean, it was literally, it was in front of me, like, and I was working on it, so. So this one, Soviet, so basically you can see the turnip getting pulled. So what that is, the Red Army eventually blowing the power away at the end. Moore is the artist on this one. Red Army, so basically Wrangel's still alive. So Wrangel is actually the leader of the White Army. Get rid of him. Okay, so this poster, which we actually go, this is the equivalent of, you know, the Russian Uncle Sam, I Want You. So quick story about these ones. So basically the Uncle Sam, I Want You, and also the one we just looked at. So the Britons wants you, that's where it comes from. So everyone thinks, so basically the Uncle Sam, which we're going to move forward to now. So you can see all the different versions that have actually come from that as well. So it's every country that's sort of done it, but even like up the top in the right hand side there, the White Army actually did their own version as well. Uncle Sam, so again, the government put together a whole bunch of people to create propaganda. James Montgomery Flagg is actually the artist on that one. So what he did, he actually went in, that was created pre-Americans joining the war. Then they used it when the Americans joined the war, but that is actually a self-portrait of James Montgomery Flagg. So it's a picture of himself. There you go, different way it was used. So these ones now, so what I've done, I've actually got a couple of like Russian posters and how they're used today. So you can see here, books in all of knowledge. Franz Ferdinand, a band, a Scottish band has used it. And even Franz Ferdinand was actually, you know, obviously one of the triggers of World War I, assassinated. It's kind of crazy how, you know, Western culture has adopted this style. This one, it's actually quite funny. Mambo, sexual politics, Reg Mombassa. You can see what he's done with the planes. It's taken from like, let's have more tanks, and he's turned it into a, you know, a sexual manifesto, which is actually quite funny. So. This one, so the poster here, so basically Shepard Fairey, which is the Obama here. I'm sure everyone knows that image as such. He uses a lot of Russian propaganda with his work as well, and he was doing this style before he actually did the Obama poster. There we go. There we go. I had to rush through the last bit. I had a little bit more text, but we're out of time, so that's it. There you go. Questions?
The exclusive use of red and black.
So sorry, the red and black, so basically the Red Army was actually where the red started to come into it. So if you look at the early Russian posters before the, you know, the Civil War, there was a lot of cartoons, but there was a lot of color in them as well. So then the whole thing with like very simple graphics that you can understand. So you associate with the Red Army, red, the black Black's always in a print, and that's where it's come from. And usually the white is usually just the colour of the paper behind it. So it's very, very simplified. So a lot of people couldn't read at the time. So they can associate with images, but the red is the Red Army.
Сама садик я садила, сама буду поливать, сама милого любила, сама буду век страдать. Подходил ко мне